Good morning, everyone. My name is Pierre Pozzo di Borgo. I work for the International Finance Corporation. I deal with investment in airport infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa.
Good morning, and my name is Andy Ricover. I'm a transport economist, and I work mostly for the World Bank Group and other development banks as well in the transportation. Pierre, I understand you've been working in the Africa region for over 25, 26 years. Why do you think it's taking so long for the private sector to come in into airport development? Mostly, even in the big markets like Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa.
Well, Andy, as you know, the African market is very fragmented. So we have more than 50 countries, and we have still a very small market, which is less than 3% of the world demand. So when we go down to the individual country outside of the big six market, we have market sizes that usually are not very conducive to large-scale private investments, simply because the economies of scale and the level of demand is not there. And so it's natural that those markets are not able to generate a lot of private sector interest or investment. On the larger market, unfortunately, which should be the one driving private sector investment, we're currently facing, I would say, a lockdown of private sector participation because public airport authority have been able either to demonstrate their skill set in managing and operating airports and financing them, or their government have decided that the financial reward of ownership of the airport was such that they didn't want to give that to private sector interest. And so that's kind of the situation that we have right now. The most attractive market are basically closed for business when it comes to private sector, and the smaller one who would like to be attractive to private sector usually like the economies of scale to actually generate the kind of interest that the government would like to see.
As well, and I understand, I'm sure you agree that the lack of a proper liberalization, even implementation of the Yamoussoukro decision, is actually what's holding the development of the market. We see an overserved market on the east side of Africa with the three major hubs of Joburg, Nairobi, and Addis, and we see nothing on the west, where also there is a huge population. Even Nigeria is not taking a role because of the airlines are not doing anything, and the lack and the failure of Royal Air Maroc to actually develop what they should be really having to Europe, from Europe into Africa. So what do you think that's?
Well, I think there are a lot of things going on here. The first one is it's true, the Yamoussoukro decision was supposed to basically create a single market. And the reality is today we're very far away from that. I mean, taking the example of Europe, the amount of time it took in Europe to create a single market. And what it means to create a single market is to have, basically supranational regulatory forces that can impose a market discipline. And the problem that we have in Africa, in my viewpoint right now, when it comes to regional services, I'm not talking about beyond Africa, I'm not talking about domestic one, is that market will not see the light of day until the larger country, which are the one who can generate the most regional demand, actually are on board with the open sky policy and are on board with the absence of distortion of market demand. What you see in South Africa with the supply side of South African Airways being bankrolled by the government again and again, when you see in the case of Kenya Airways being saved through a government bailout, when you see in Ethiopia with Ethiopian Airlines, where we have to assume there's some underwriting of its balance sheet by the government, although it's unclear what it is, there's a huge amount of distortion. And if the leading markets are distorting the market and making it more favorable for their local operators, it's very hard for them to advocate to the smaller and small size and medium sized market to open up, because people see that simply as an unfair bargain that is being proposed, where they will be absorbed into a larger market without any, I would say, profitable revenue on their side at the end of the day. So I think the distortion of the market because of public omnipresence in airline management and the lack of a regulator that can say, no, the rule of the game cannot be different from one market to another, like European regulators have done it, where government subsidy in airline to Alitalia, to Air France, to British Airways were successfully challenged, and they were told, no, you cannot do that because you're distorting competition. Until Africa reaches that level of maturity, I think the notion of a single regional market for Africa will be more of an illusion than reality.
But we've seen in South America a similar situation where actually the expansion of LAN Chile before, LAN LAN Ecuador, LAN Bolivia, LAN Colombia, LAN Peru, and today LATAM, the expansion was like building subsidiaries, actually even Seven Freedom under the, even though under different, they were not that under Seven Freedoms. But do you think that could be as well the possibility of an expansion of for example, Ethiopian, we know that they have attempts to develop sort of a hub in Togo, in Lomé.
Yeah.
Do you think that that could be a possibility, even on the assumption that the airlines continue to receive funds from the government, but maybe, okay, let's do them some kind of...
So what you're pointing out is interesting, because indeed Ethiopian Airlines has decided that the best way for them to expand within the regional Africa is to create those subsidiary, those dots all around Africa. They have Air Malawi, they have ASCA in Togo, they're in discussion with Chad, we're in discussion with Guinea and many other countries. And where I think this underscores one big issue that we have is that the ownership rules when it comes to regional airline in Africa remain too stringent. It's not an open market. In Togo, for example, in the West Africa region, the regulation for what they call ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West Africa, it's ownership for non-Economic Community of West Africa state of no more than 39%. And that makes no sense. It means that Africa has sub-region with different rules in terms of ownership. If you were to break down this barrier tomorrow, the capital could flow more easily from the one who have to the one who have not. Today it's still being limited, and it means that those subsidiaries still have to rely either on government capital or local capital that in both cases is fairly dire. And so what you see is that where you should have had Pan-African Airlines created a long time ago, because of those regulations, among other things, you cannot have this spread of a successful airline throughout the region to provide basically region-wide network.
Pierre, thank you very much. As always, has been a pleasure. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for sharing your experience with everyone here at GAD.
Andy, a pleasure as always, and see you soon.